This is The Bottom Line, a show designed to help Australian businesses succeed. On the show, you'll hear from leading Australian business owners as they share the lessons they've learned building their companies. You'll learn from their successes as well as some of the challenges they faced along the way. We also talk to experts from a range of fields who share specialised techniques you can use to improve your business. I'm your host, Savan Tuna, and I'm a director at Alexander Spencer, and I'm really passionate about helping Australian businesses succeed. Planning for retirement isn't just about saving. It's about making strategic decisions that can shape your financial future. While many rely on traditional superannuation funds, others opt for a more hands-on approach with self-managed super funds. These funds offer greater flexibility, but is the added responsibility truly worth it? Today, we're joined by Rony John. Rony is the SMSF Manager at Alexander Spencer. With years of experience guiding clients through the complexities of SMSFs, Rony helps individuals understand their options, assists them with their tax obligations, and maximises the benefits of managing their own super. In this episode, we'll take a deep dive into the world of SMSFs, sharing real client stories of how they've been used to build wealth, uncovering the benefits and risks, as well as highlighting the key factors to consider before setting one up. Let's dive in. Rony, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Savan. I've been a long-time fan. It's good to be part of the show this time.
Well, you're our first employee on The Bottom Line, and you're one of my favourites. I know I don't love this space as much as other accountants, but I love the work that you do for us. But before we get going, not everyone knows you as intently as I do. I'd love to, get to know your story. I know you have a really interesting story, and I'd love for you to share that story with our audience.
So I wasn't born in Australia, to start off and set the scene. My family originated from India, so I was born in Mumbai, I think in the past called Bombay, or currently called Bombay. My parents were traveling away from the support of their family, so it was a difficult time for them. Raising me, not having the financial support, they had to make a lot of sacrifices so, they could come together as a family. But in their mind, they were always looking for something better, a better opportunity, because they knew in staying in India wasn't the end goal. There is something better for them outside. So they were actively looking, and they found an opportunity to move to South Africa at that stage. And I was probably 3 or 4 years old when that happened. So they made a bold decision. My dad initially moved. He started finding some work in some remote parts of Southern Africa. And then my mum and I eventually joined him as well. So initially we stayed with my auntie and family. So we had that support network when we moved at the first instance. But it was a big change because we were very much sort of split from each other. My dad was working in one location. My mum and I were, staying separately. But eventually we sort of met up together in Pretoria, one of the 3 capitals of South Africa. And that's where we kind of built our life, started off. And look, life was rough there. Well, we were, I think, reasonably well off as a family because both my parents had good jobs as engineers. We really saw the frontline things that happened in South Africa. Being there as a foreigner, we witnessed crime with family members and ourselves personally. So around the year 2002, I was having lunch with my dad at his workplace, and I was maybe 12 years old at that stage. And as we were walking back to the car park, 3 guys hooded with knives came running up past me. I'm thinking, what's going on? And they came up straight to my dad, held the knife to his throat and demanded that he hand over his watch, his laptop. And that was a complete shock for me at that stage. I just yelled out and I thought, I can't do anything. I'm helpless. And, something bad could really happen at that stage. So thankfully, nothing happened to him. They took his laptop, but didn't manage to take his watch. That was a special memento from his father who had passed away a few years back. So he held on to that. But after that incident, my parents, they came together and thought, look, we don't want this type of life for our kids. We want them to live in safety, have good opportunity as well. So they started looking outside of South Africa, and then Australia came up as the first option. We were, I think, initially considering Darwin, But thankfully, we moved to Melbourne. I think that's a much smarter choice. So
Oh, definitely. It's very warm up there, Ronnie.
don't love the warmth. I know, very cold weather oriented person.
Oh, well, you
So,
chose a great city to be in.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so we moved here in 2003, in January 2003. And that was a good time, everything, the prices were low. Petrol, I still recall, was 70 cents at the time. And, obviously, you feel the pinch now living in the city, but, it was a good time to migrate. Back then, it was a big decision for my parents because they sold everything. The only things we came with were a few boxes of my dad's study material. He's a bit of a hoarder. He loves to keep all his education materials, thinking maybe at some stage I'll need this. So we had, 5-6 boxes just for that, some linen and some furniture. And that was it. Like there was no support when we came here or no guarantee, that they would get a job. So it took a good 9 months. My dad getting involved in a few different institutions. They were both trained as engineers. So he started in the telecom industry coming here. That was with Siemens at the time, and then they split off. So that was a difficult phase for us. We went through a few challenges, not knowing if we would get by. But thankfully we did. A large part of it was support with the St. Vincent de Paul community. So we were provided emergency housing and also some income support just to get through those few months. So thankfully, we made it through. And as a family, despite the challenges, our faith was very strong in the Bible and in Yahweh, in the promises that we have. So that really kept us centered and, looking for something better. So, yeah, I think together we've come through a lot and brought us to where we are. Really appreciate the journey, the struggle we've been through, and the opportunity we have now. It didn't come easy, but we know the other side. If we don't make the best of the opportunity, what can happen? There's nothing else we can sort of fall back to.
What did you learn from that experience? How does that shape you to the person you are today?
I think the main thing was because we spent so much of our lives moving, we would connect with people in a certain place and then we'd move and then connect and then move. And then I tried to reconnect with a lot of the friends, back in primary school, but couldn't find anyone on Facebook. So it's like a large part of your life just disappears, that history, that connection, and it's really hard to rebuild that. So that's the part that sometimes you really miss out and, you want that back, but you can't always get it back. So, from that experience, I've kind of learned, we've got to be independent. We make our own story. So whoever we interact with, it's building that connection, which is potentially a lifelong connection. So I learned to value that more because I've missed out on a lot of that during childhood.
And what about the three hooded men? You're 12 years old. That would have been, I'm thinking back now, my daughter's 12 and she's turning 13 soon. And I'm just visualizing what she would be like in that situation. And she's old enough now, you said it would have been grade 6, year 7 time for you. You're old enough to vividly remember that or for that to have an impact on you. How did that shape you? Did you go through some trauma, PTSD, or were you resilient and it was the water off a duck's back?
No, thankfully, I think I was young enough where I could just, wipe that off the back, not suffer too much. Because my dad was safe, I knew, okay, look, it's fine. We can always, touch base afterward. But if something had happened, I think that, that story would have been much different and possibly shaped me differently to who I am today.
You're the SMSF Manager here at Alexander Spencer. And like I said, we love having you at the firm. You've really taken our division to another level. I know our clients love interacting with you and talking to you about their superannuation. How did you get into it? Because SMSF, like I said, I'm not as excited by it as you are, but I'd love to know how you fell into it or whether you actively wanted to get into super. So yeah, I'd love to hear that story on your journey to self-managed super funds.
So I might track a little bit back to high school days. So when I was going through the education system, obviously we experienced that up until grade 5 in South Africa. Saw what that life is like, noticed a massive difference coming here. So I finished grade 6, did high school. My parents have always been sort of goal-driven, pushing us, as kids to achieve. Because like I said, there's no fallback option. We don't have anything else or any family or support networks if we don't achieve well. So that's always been a driving factor. Look, I've got to make something of my life, do the best I can. So always had that in me where, look, I'll achieve hard. Compared to some of the smarter kids in the grade, I probably didn't pick things up as quickly, but I was dedicated. I was motivated to pick things up and learn. So that guided me through year 10, 11, and 12. And I would wake up, early mornings, similar to you, Savan. You're early starter,
Yeah.
So, I was up 4 a.m., doing my study, revision, getting everything done. So that was every single day. Wouldn't miss a day where I was constantly revising the content, just making sure things sink in. So those habits really helped me. So as I got to the final exams, I was really scared going into it and not sure. Look, I thought I'm going to fail everything. I feel a little bit underprepared. But thankfully, the outcome was much better than I expected. So I ended up the top 5% of the state, really good ATAR. And, I thought, look, what I wanted to do, I was thinking beforehand, it's either going to be as a physiotherapist or accounting, because I did really well in accounting in year 11, did that accelerated. Thankfully, a little bit of guidance from parents, they kind of foresaw, where my strengths are and what I would like to do. So I was a little bit guided there in taking the accounting pathway. So I pursued that. Once I started uni, so I started at Melbourne University, did a double degree in accounting and finance. Second last year, I took up an opportunity with a firm in Blackburn working in their tax department. So it was as a grad, learning the ropes, just working in tax return and a tax team, doing tax returns. Got a little bit of experience in business services, some with audit. Super was very much an unknown area, so I didn't touch it, didn't know anything about it at that stage. But I always kind of had a little bit of curiosity. Okay, what do they do? I'd like to, find out more. But we didn't have that opportunity. It wasn't shared amongst us. So when I see other firms where younger grads have that opportunity to work in different divisions, get experience, I'm actually a little bit jealous because, they get that. And it's really good to get that exposure. One thing you miss out on is obviously that interaction with the clients, which you don't get always up front. You have to prove yourself. But I think the way we structure, the way we've done the training with junior staff, we've actively promoted that. So I think that's a credit to our firm where we give that opportunity where that wasn't available when I was going through the system as a grad. So look, that was the start of my career. I started in the tax team. It didn't really work out for me. I had a team leader and I had a manager. What I found, when I sent jobs in for review with my team leader, she was very, very tough on me. So she was the main point of contact, the main person that reviews everything. Whereas if I'd send jobs to the manager, things would go through smoothly. So there was always that disconnect. So they end up telling me, look, maybe look for a different, pathway. Accounting's not for you. So it was a bit of a shock. I was in the dumps a little bit at that stage. And I thought, I've spent 3 years studying accounting and what's it come to? Nothing, if this is not my strength. So then I was thinking, what was the experience? She was really tough as a team leader. Like I would get yelled at as a grad in front of everyone in the group for making a mistake. I thought, no, this is bad. Is this what other firms are like? Is this the experience that you get? But that was what shaped me the first job, probably 6 months, 8 months when I was in, because other people were getting promoted to business services, but, they were kind of holding me back a little bit. So that's where I was around 2014. But thankfully, before the prayer came in handy, praying diligently, and, an opportunity came up with a firm in Caulfield. They needed somebody to look after the super division and do a little bit of business services. So it was a 60-40 split at the time. So I interviewed with them. They were very impressed. It's not so much that I knew anything about super, but, the attitude, the willingness to learn, which the partners saw, and they wanted to invest in that. So I took that up, took the role, and started heading up their super division. And they had around 90 funds. So it was a good learning curve, learning the software. But my attitude has always been, it doesn't matter where you come from. You can always learn things. If you've got that mentality to learn, to commit yourself, you can pick up anything. So there was so much terminology in super that I wasn't aware of. So it was like learning a new language. But I put my skills into place. Like every night I would take home magazines, the SMSF magazine, the SMSF advisor, newsletters, read content online. None of it made sense. But over time, things started to click very quickly. And the partners recognized that for the technical ability that continued to grow and grow. An opportunity was given to contact clients. I didn't have that before. But I remember the partner at the time, and I'll mention his name, Travis, because he had a significant influence on me as a leader, because his approach was so different. And I think the reason for my success is largely in part to him, because his approach is about encouraging, seeing the potential in people. And when I saw the difference in leadership between him and, say, the old team leader, I thought to myself, look, if I ever get to a stage where I am a leader, managing a group of people, I never want to be replicating the experience that I've got here. I want to be looking at good leaders and replicating that, because there's so much potential in people. And when you learn to unlock that, people really work for you. And today I can say hand on heart, look, the team that I've built, there's a high level of trust. They feel comfortable. Like if they make a mistake, I'm not going to smash them over the head. Look, it's okay to make a mistake, but my standards are here and my team know that. So They do really well, and I'm very proud of them. But it's also because of the approach I have that we have this open communication. I do check in on them, but it's my experience, what I've learned, that's obviously helped them where they are today. So look, Savan, that's a little bit of background, what brought me to accounting. Between 2014, 2023, 24, since I came to Alexander Spencer, it's been a journey of building that experience in super, stepping through the ranks eventually as a manager about 2 or 3 years ago. And then, touching base with you and Vincent and, finding the opportunity here, which is so different to other firms. So, look, I'm really glad, really thankful to be part of the family here at Alexander Spencer. And yeah, look, I'm happy to take on any challenges that come. So,
Well, you've joined me in the podcast room now, Ronnie. We're going to pick that brain of yours and go deep into self-managed super funds. But let's start with an easy one. For our listeners that are unfamiliar with what a self-managed super fund is, I'd love for you to just briefly give a bit of a background so we can set the scene. What is a self-managed super fund?
everyone in Australia will have a super fund. So by law, your employer is required to deposit a minimum amount, currently 11.5% of your wages, to your super fund. That will usually be an industry, retail, or corporate fund, or in the rare instance, a defined benefit fund, depending on the occupation. Self-managed super fund sits outside of that. So it's a special structure. It's a trust structure. There's a restriction on the number of members, but there's more flexibility. So while there are rules about what you can and can't do within a self-managed fund, it does open up a lot more flexibility with your choice of investments, how you plan for retirement, estate planning, and who you have as members of your managed super fund. So that's what I love, because there's clearly a market for that. People are interested building their own self-managed fund, managing their investments. I've recently just opened up my own self-managed fund.
Well done.
So I can say, look, I'm part of that market too, because there is certain attraction to that. It's not for everyone. You have to have the right mentality, the right approach. You can get frustrated if you don't see things working, because having an industry or retail fund, you're very much hands-off. But within SMSF, it's very much on you. Or if you have trusted professionals, advisor, looking after investments, you can rely on them. But what level is your involvement? And when you see the returns, maybe it's not working in your favor. That's when some of those frustrations can come in, and you think, was it worth it setting it up in the first place?
So, Ronnie, you're setting up SMSFs on a regular basis. What are generally the motivations for our clients that want to set up a self-managed super fund? What are the reasons people do that?
So when people approach us, set up a self-managed fund, a loan or providing assistance to members or relatives of a super fund. So this became a very interesting discussion, because the client is persistent that it was a loan to this company, but we could see, no, that wasn't the case. So then I started to investigate, okay, look, he's not being entirely honest with us, but we still have an obligation. He's trusted us to prepare the accounts. I started thinking a bit more broadly in terms of the client's situation, because he's revealed other things to me that, look, he needed the funds because he suffered a severe accident at work. He'd walked into a pipe and suffered permanent disability. So he talked to his doctors, and they certified, look, he can never go back to the same position that he was working in because of this injury at work. So that's when I thought, look, the client has tried to do something, but is there another option? He's less than his what we call preservation age. Yes, there are other conditions of release, and one being total and permanent disability. So I had a look through all the requirements, checked with the auditor, and they were happy. As long as we could provide the necessary documentation from a general and a specialist, which the client was able to provide, that was all documented, we were able to say, look, hey, you've withdrawn the money, but we can prove now that's been done legally under another condition of release. So that's where he didn't want to disclose the information to us, thinking we would, get him in trouble. But as an accountant, it's important to know that we do work with you. We try and help you when things go wrong. So always try to get in the front foot. And people are a little bit scared of the ATO as well, but ATO have a system of voluntary disclosure if something does happen, where you can put that to them, rely on the discretion. And most often what I've heard in the industry is that, look, they do give a more favorable outcome, or they don't impose penalties where that voluntary disclosure is made. So it's not widely known, but it's a very powerful tool when you know something has happened, to get on the front foot and try to rectify it without trying to make up a story, I guess.
Back in the old days, we used to do audit in-house. As you would know, we used to, put up the Chinese walls, and one partner would prepare the accounts and another partner would do the audit. And I remember many years ago, I had to do an audit. And as you know, I'm a bit of a Porsche fan, and I'm looking at these accounts, and this gentleman had bought I think it was back then, a 997 Porsche, which was about 100 grand at the time. It was his only asset in the fund. And there were a lot of issues around that. But I'll get you to explain what are some of the issues. One, can you buy a car in a super fund? And then if you wanted to, and if you can, what are the ways to do it?
Yeah, so you can buy a car in your super
Oh,
fund.
no, that's it. I'm going to the dealership tomorrow.
No, look, don't go straight on buying that without looking at the rules. Obviously, that's very important. What we look at there is in terms of the rules with collectibles, personal use assets. That's where there are restrictions that we need to look in. So those rules were tightened back in 2013. So they include having an appropriate insurance policy over the asset, making sure you don't use it for any personal use, not renting it to any related party. You can rent it to an unrelated party. And those are the general requirements. There are other requirements with holding collectibles or personal use assets. So it is more restricted. It's kind of a disincentive for people to hold unusual assets, but it is possible. We see fancy cars, we see, gold, those things that are more tangible, even watches, Rolex watches. I've seen that in super, heritage plates. Yeah.
It's interesting. I have another story. A client rings me. It was a Saturday night. This was funny as it was Saturday night. I'm lying on the couch and this client rings me drunk. It's probably about tipping about 9:30, 10, but you can tell he's drunk. There's loud noises in the background. And he says, Savan, I've just bought at auction at my son's school a 3-carat diamond ring for 50K. I'm like, yeah, and why are you ringing me? I don't have 50K. And he goes, neither do I. Can I invest this diamond in the super fund? And I'm like, are you kidding me? And it was interesting. So, obviously you weren't here at the time. We went and did all that due diligence. And technically in that scenario, he was able to. And he since sold the diamond ring, made money out of it, but it was an in and out. It was very quick. But yeah, it's crazy. But this brings up something, right? We get excited by, unique investments, people's savings. Even if you don't make a lot of money, you can start to accumulate a lot of money in super. Self-managed super funds and creating them can create some serious risk. So we don't want to downplay the importance of this because there are things that go wrong, and we want to make sure that clients understand that this is for their retirement. Self-managed super fund is a form of a structure that hopefully accelerates their growth and allows them to have some control. So, we talked about goats and diamond rings and cars, but as a firm, we encourage clients to be diligent with their money, get the advice. So it's really important. But there are shonky people out there, surfing the social media scenes, and you see some stuff. One of the things that I see a lot of is people spruiking SMSFs and setting up self-managed super funds purely to buy property and to borrow money to buy property. And when you start to unpack that and look at the layers of what's going on, generally these spruikers are not financial advisors, they're not accountants. Generally, then they're coming at an angle from a property development perspective. So generally the property developers or their marketing teams are going, we've got to sell these hundreds of apartments that we've built. We're going to make lots of money building them, but we need suckers to buy them. And because they're at that sort of smaller entry level, I see a lot of these property developers that are targeting the lower class communities where they may have $200,000-$300,000 in super. They're in their late 50s, and they're targeting these people to invest in super directly via property using leverage. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but also what advice would you have to our clients or people that see those things, and what are the red flags that they should be looking for?
So thankfully, I've never been approached by a property spooker. Now that I've set up my own self-managed fund, they might find me on the database and say, hey, do you want to invest in a property? But look, Savan, it's a valid point. There's a lot of that going around, and individuals need to be aware, because it's not just those with a self-managed fund, but those with an industry fund where the company will set up within Australia, overseas, and hey, like you said, you want to buy attractive investment, buying a property within your fund. You can leverage X amount. There's a lot they don't disclose to you. They don't tell you because that's where they haven't done their due diligence or gone through the advice process. So considering whether is it appropriate for the individuals, what's their super balances, what's their experience with investing, what's the minimum required for a deposit. Also, what are their fees? Because that's one thing they often don't disclose, and that's hidden and you won't see that. So There's always a reason why they're promoting certain investments, whether it's a scheme. But we as advisors, we're always careful to not recommend a certain pathway. It's always directed by what the client wants, what their instruction is. But at the same time, we try to look at all the facts. Is this appropriate for them without trying to push them towards a certain direction? And ASIC are definitely on the front foot. There's a lot of these scheme promoters where they're cancelling deregistration for the company, fines, penalties being imposed. And that's good because that advice, space has been highly regulated since 2014. For us as accountants, we've had long relationships, history with our clients. It means there's certain things, obviously, we can't advise that we used to be able to do back in the day. But it also means for the rest of the industry, there is more protection from people like this, so promoting schemes, spruiking property. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but, you can see why that would be in place.
Rony, there's so much going on social media. SMSF is obviously such a hot topic. I'm going to show you a video that I'd love to get your opinion on and see what your thoughts are.
Really bad idea, and I've unfortunately seen a heap of people that have got sucked in by people pushing self-managed super funds with an agenda and ended up seriously slowing down and sabotaging their progress. Self-managed super funds are typically sold with the allure of using your super money to invest into property, and they talk about the marketing line of being able to pay down a mortgage with tax-deductible super contributions. Now, this actually makes a lot of sense and sounds really appealing, but there's a couple of serious errors in this thinking. Now,
what are your thoughts on that? The super funds suck.
I disagree with that point because I've seen we work with a lot of our clients. We see where self-managed super fund really works and, they're achieving well above their returns for industry funds. We see the opposite side too, where, maybe it's not doing as well. And that could be in the case, where there's a property has just been purchased, there's a loan in place and those repayments are funded by the members' contributions. They're not seeing the growth of that particular asset. So a lot of it's perspective, but I disagree that it sucks because it's a powerful tool and it can be used.
I think he's really going in there with the whole idea of just be aware of the property spruikers, but he's also alienating a lot of people by saying that. So for me, what I see that works really, really well, and I'd love to dive a little bit into it, is a lot of business owners have premises that they work in and they pay lots of rent. We touched on it a little bit, but I see a lot of benefits in people being able to access their superannuation, leverage that, and then buy commercial property that they then ultimately rent into and diversify with other cash. So I see property as a really great opportunity for clients to leverage within super. But I do see the point of the property spruikers because it's not probably as common and the property industry's come back a little bit in Victoria. But when it was flying, it was a lot of people out there getting sucked into these little small apartments with very highly geared and very difficult to sell. So, Rony, there's another gentleman that I saw online. This was a bit of a red flag. I love to get your opinion on this little video.
Buying property using a self-managed super fund and how I bought property using super money as a deposit. Basically, I had about 45 to 50,000 in my as superannuation. I took that 45,000 in my rest superannuation account and I had to roll it over and create a self-managed super fund. So I had to get an accountant and a financial advisor to set up that self-managed super fund. It entails creating things like trusts, entities, companies. To do the rollover roughly cost me almost about $4,000. The paperwork I signed was ridiculously long. There was like folders and folders of paperwork. Basically, the 46,000, that was in now what they call a self-managed super fund cash management account. I took some of my own money and savings, let's say it was about 20,000, I dumped it in there. So it brought the balance from 46,000 up to 66,000. I then went to get a loan pre-approval or talk to a broker. The broker said, hey, you can borrow about 200,000, 300,000.
So this gentleman has got 46,000 in super. What are your thoughts? What are the red flags? Tell me about this one.
Firstly, I think he's been poorly advised to set up a self-managed fund because anyone with 40, 50,000, firstly, they don't have enough of a deposit. And if they're using 100%, look, does he have any external money that he's going to contribute into super?
Well, he says he's got
As in-
20 grand, Ronnie. They're now up to 66. What do you reckon? You reckon he can borrow to buy property?
I think that's going to be very difficult, Sivan.
I reckon he's buying a tent with the money that he's got in super. The other red flag for me in that one is he said, I've got 46 in super. I went and set up a SMSF. And then he said after he set it up, he went and spoke to a broker. I reckon you got to speak to a broker before you go and do these things. And this just smells for me. Like, you can tell he's not a financial advisor. You can tell he's not an accountant. Obviously, he says he's gone to an accountant. He's mumbling his words. And this is the stuff we see online. And what we want to say to our clients and people that see this stuff is that you got to be really careful because, again, it's a powerful tool, done well, done right. But you can get yourself into so much trouble if you listen to these type of videos. So I find this one really hilarious where it gets so many views. This gets like hundreds of views, thousands of likes. And before you know it, people go out and think they can do these things. And what are your thoughts?
And what you can hear is the frustration. I mean, if somebody's advised him to set up a self-managed fund, buy property when it's not appropriate for him, obviously, he was directed at that time and he realizes this wasn't the right decision. Obviously, he might be struggling to make the repayments or maybe didn't get the loan that he wanted. So it's understandable, but, it's a very good point, Sivan. Look, just be careful whenever people approach you to say, hey, this is a good idea. Always, speak to an accountant or advisor that's registered in that space to see, look, what's your circumstance? Is this the best, decision?
So the next part I want to talk about is the tax benefits of super. So we talked about investment. We talked about, obviously, things around why people do it. But superannuation, whether it's SMSF or industry, we have the ability to accelerate our growth by contributing and moving our wealth into self-managed super fund. So I'd love for you to talk to us about the tax benefits, how we get the money in there, what does that mean, without overcomplicating it for our audience. I'd love for a little quick snapshot of how we get money into super and how that all works and the tax benefits of it.
I actually love this area, Sivan, because it's a discussion you have with clients every year, whether they've got an existing fund or they're thinking of setting up a self-managed fund. You talked a few strategies about minimizing personal tax, and that's possible where members would make a contribution, treat that as what we call a concessional contribution, so a pre-tax amount. There are certain limits that apply, but they can get a deduction in their tax return, subject to their income. Depending on their age, they might have to meet, say, a work test would apply. But that's a smart way to do that, and it's much easier with a self-managed fund. With an industry fund, when you make the contribution, there are times you have to notify them. If it's not done within those times or missed, you might not be able to get the deduction. And the reporting with the ATO, that's locked with the super fund. If they don't do that, you haven't notified them, that's a problem. With a self-managed fund, you've got a bit more flexibility. Look, the forms should be provided at the time you make the contribution. That was your intention. But we have a bit more flexibility until we prepare the return. Then we can decide, look, what is the best outcome? Because while we anticipate we might do some tax planning and say, look, your income's here, there might be some other factors which we're not aware of. They might be on a lower bracket and it might not be tax effective to allocate that 30,000. We might move it into, say, an after-tax contribution has a higher limit. There's different reasons for doing that. And look, the way you think of it, concessional contributions, they largely result in a tax benefit, whether for yourself or your employer. After-tax or non-concessional contributions, they're a good way to boost up your super. And they're treated differently within the super environment, but together they can be used. When you think about strategies, you're always thinking about combining different strategies. So it's dependent on the situation, the individual. So if you have one spouse that's working, another that isn't, there are strategies where you can equalize their super, and that might be a valid strategy to, say, minimize risk. One of the things the government were looking at were taxing members with more than 3 mil. So, that strategy can be quite powerful to say, look, if one member is already at 2.9, another with 500K, hey, can we not shift funds between one member to another, avoid the chance that one will be taxed, extra 15%. So it's about thinking through those options, what's there. If a client has accidentally made a contribution in June, which would ordinarily push them over that limit, there are strategies where we can reallocate that to the next year, or there might be some carry forward amounts that we can allocate. And likely, likewise, clients on a lower income tax bracket, we never forget them. There are different offsets that apply, and we think of ways that, look, they might get a tax offset, whether it's $540 as a tax offset personally, or the government contributing some extra funds for a low-income spouse. So there's a lot there, and a self-managed super fund provides the flexibility for us to look at those strategies and implement them much easier than an industry fund.
And what about the contributions that are non-concessional? And let's say I want to accelerate my contributions really fast. What are some of the ways that we can do that? We're using non-concessional. The cap is at a limit. Can we put more in at a particular time? Take us through, maybe a 50, 55-year-old now has paid off his home loan. He's got savings. He might have got an inheritance, but he knows that his preservation age, or he's going to get closer to being able to access super. How does he take wealth outside of super and go put it in a really fast way? What is all the tricks? I want to know all of them. We talked a little bit about these tricks with a client just recently together. So concessional, non-concessional, there's a few other little ones. Can you take me through a journey of how I could potentially take some wealth and put it into super?
Yeah, so you touched on it, the two types of contributions, concessional, non-concessional. Outside of that, we think more broadly. So it's
what are the numbers though, right? So concessional, how much can we put in?
Currently $30,000
per annum.
Per
And
member.
Tax deductible.
Tax deductible.
And non-concessional, what are they?
It's $120,000 per annum per member. And with non-concessional, there is a special 3-year rule. So if you have extra cash lying around, you want to top that into super, you don't care about getting a deduction, you can use that 3-year bring forward, where you would bring forward the next 2 years of non-concessional limits, the 120,000, contribute that as one large amount in the current year, so that instead of 120,000, you could do up to 360,000. We would look at how much you have in super, because that's very, very important. Somebody with a very high super balance, there might be a restriction how much of that 360 you can use. Somebody with lower super balance, look, that full amount might be available. So that's a good way to speed up your super balance if you've got those funds.
And once it goes into super, what's the tax rate? So other than the fact that it gets invested, I'm getting a tax deduction, so I might be saving 47 cents. And it goes in there, but what am I paying and how does that work?
So that's the advantages of keeping money in super, because it is a lower tax environment than you would be paying otherwise or in a company. Tax is 15% in a super environment while you're still working, contributing. So now, once you reach a certain age, once you retire, that's when the game shifts significantly, and you might decide to go into a pension phase. So while you're working, you're in the accumulation contribution phase. But once you reach that age or retire, then you can make a decision to start a pension. And there are significant tax savings from making that decision and converting to pension.
And what does that mean? So do I continue to pay 15%? What does that look like?
So it may be a combination of both. In the past, there was no real limit on how much you could have in pension. The government have imposed limits from 2017. So at that stage, it was 1.6 million that could be kept in pension, and the rest would have to be kept in the taxable or the accumulation phase. That limit's been indexed. It really depends how much does a member have in super. So if they're below 1.6, potentially, yes, all the earnings could be tax-free if they're in pension phase.
Wow. Very powerful tool, right? You're contributing in at 15%. You're getting a tax deduction. If you have the ability to get, lucky enough to have inheritance that comes in, you can transfer that aggressively or whatnot. And once it's in there, it grows. And then if you're below certain caps, and you mentioned 1.6, it's tax-free. So it is an opportunity for people to consider. What other contributions are there? There's a few other that you didn't touch on. Just very briefly, you want to go through them?
So look, in terms of, we think of the two broad categories, so concessional. So you've got your employer, you've got any salary sacrifice amounts that you make, as well as your personal concessional contributions. When you think of after-tax contributions, so personal after-tax contributions. But in addition to that, there are certain after-tax contributions which are not dependent on the annual limit, the 120,000. So they could be, if you're running a business, you sell the business, you could contribute some of the proceeds to super. And we would look at, what portion is potentially exempt under that sale of business exemption and what portion is classified as a non-concessional contribution. You might sell your own home. So for those over 55 years of age, it's a strategy we see used in a few of our clients where, they want to sell that home and they want to contribute part of the proceeds to super. Now, the benefit of that is that's separate to the non-concessional limit, But what's really important is the timing of when that money goes in, because depending on how much a member has, if you make the decision to contribute the downsizer, what we call the downsizer contribution before the end of the financial year, that might impact the ability to make after-tax contributions in future. So there's a lot of careful planning that goes on. It's not just about dumping the money into super and here you go.
Well, sounds like planning is the key. Getting the right advice is the key. And obviously thinking broadly and with the future in mind. I know that I don't love super, but I think I can talk to you for hours on this topic. I'm now getting this energy back of how super can benefit our clients. However, we've run out of time. I want to say thank you for, one, joining the firm a couple of years ago, a bit longer than that now. You've done amazing things here, and I know that we've got ambitious growth plans in our self-managed super fund division, and we're looking forward to seeing how that grows. For those people that want to have a chat to you, how can they reach out?
I've got my page on the website, or they can reach me via LinkedIn. I do a lot of posting articles so that everyone can keep up to date with all the changes.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on The Bottom Line, Rony. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
My pleasure, Savan. Thanks for having me.
This is The Bottom Line, a show designed to help Australian businesses succeed. This podcast was produced by accountancy firm Alexander Spencer. At Alexander Spencer, we've been helping business owners realise their goals since 1952. And we play a pivotal role in developing, implementing, and supervising the business goals and strategies of our clients. To find out how we can help your business succeed, head to our website, alexanderspencer.com.au. To make sure you don't miss an episode of The Bottom Line, be sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Savan Tuna, and we'll be back next episode with more tips to help you transform your business. And that's The Bottom Line.